Hello.
G'day, Charlie. Can you hear me, mate?
I can do. How are you doing, bud?
Very good. Just come in from the yard. So, haven't washed my hands, but I don't really need to type much, so that's good.
Fantastic. What have you been doing in the yard?
Well, I'm trying to finish I'm trying to finish about 10 things and didn't really get anything done, but
Right.
just a bit of a writing break.
Yeah.
A cabinet for the inside of the robe for my wife.
Right.
She's been taking up too much of my cupboard, so it's win-win for both of us.
Yeah, you need more room for hats and shoes, I'm guessing.
Pretty much, mate.
Yeah. The general outline. So, like I said, this is fairly unstructured. General point is I just wanted to know more about your background in DIY, which clearly you're still upkeeping. But where did it all start? How did you start getting into all of this? Was it dad? Was it granddad? Was it family? Was it just an adventurous spirit to want to build things with hammers? Or
Well, it was lots, yeah. So in terms of being handy and DIY and sort of wanting to use my hands to build things, yeah, I suppose it's just a mix of a lot of people in my formative years.
Yeah.
From my gran, who makes everything, to dad, who's the obvious choice, who was sort of a junkyard kind of builder and built all the fencing in his studio and all the sheds and most of the house when I was a kid. And then and my mum too, who's super handy. She's a sewer and a gardener and just a can-do kind of woman. So I suppose between those few people and just having a natural interest in cubby houses and stuff as a kid, the way it went.
how much freedom did you have when you were a kid for that kind of stuff? Was it a case of you're being left with a load of planks and leftover tools, or was it here's what to do, here's how to do it, and I'll do it?
Yeah,
with
never much structure in learning. Very much use whatever was left over. I had kind of I saw dad, what my biggest asset as a kid, or at least what I really wanted, was a nail bag or, a tool pouch.
Yeah.
And so I remember making one just out of string and some boxes as a kid.
Yeah.
And I'd put the things in the boxes and then lash them. And I was probably only 8 or 9, I don't know.
Yeah.
So the one thing I wasn't allowed an endless supply of, I could use as much junk wood as dad wasn't using, but nails. I had a specific amount of nails I could use essentially per week because kids love nailing.
Yes.
So as a young boy, I would get a plank of wood and just fill it full of nails. And dad wasn't too keen on that. So I had to be rationed.
Yeah. So I mentioned in my email that my dad was bloody useless. So I used to go out and I was one of those kids, of the 2000s with the aggressively baggy clothing and wanting to build skate parks everywhere. So I used to go into the garden with all the scrap wood during renovations and I would go, why won't dad come and help me? And it turns out he was spying me out the window, watching me use up all of his nails and screws and just getting increasingly frustrated. Yeah, that's why he didn't come out to help. And I was like, oh, wow, I only waited 20 years for that one. How did that continue into your teenage years then? Did you still continue building things and trying to kind of upkeep that sense of if I need something, I'll just build it, or did it drift off? Or
yeah, no, definitely. Being sort of a country kid too, you grow up on a small bit of acreage and there's always things that need doing. So fencing and things that break, and an old timber house constantly needs work. So I suppose by osmosis, you sort of just take on a lot of this stuff. A lot of country people are very handy by default of just being with more acreage and more stuff to fix,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where it started, I suppose. It never really stopped from being a kid, as far as I can gather.
Yeah.
And then was really consolidated as a 16 or 17-year-old when my sister's boyfriend at the time, he was a few years older than me, and I just went and worked with him in the summers, and he taught me a lot. He was a gun builder.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the modern day then, because what I see is I'm very abnormal in my group in terms of I've got a couple of friends where we work on our cars together, and that's about it. So in terms of building and wanting to do gardening and brew your own beer and build a fence, I'm certainly the outlier in my group. But what I wonder is, for those who didn't grow up in the country and don't necessarily have that specific, impetus, that specific reason to build, where can people get into those skill sets who necessarily weren't raised in that environment? You know, what is it for the modern day person who doesn't necessarily, you know, a city dweller or is a suburbanite who doesn't grow up in the country so much in the same way where things need fixing all the time? How can a person like that get into such skills?
Well, I suppose there's many ways you can think of that. I mean, in the kind of educator, philosopher in me would say that not everyone needs to have those skills. And so, you know, in the modern kind of urban way where we get our food from a mega store that is, you know, that is tapped into a supply chain that's unfathomable, really. We've got such a huge disconnection with stuff, or at least where our things come from, and particularly in a made or a grown capacity. Now, there mightn't be anything wrong with that. I'm not sure. And a lot of people will say there is lots wrong with that. But I suppose I've got to challenge that as much as my default position, probably like yours, Charlie, where we think all people should know how to use their hands more and build things and fix things. But then maybe I think, well, maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe that is just a skilled trade. And we haven't always been all jack of all trades. So, you know, so we've always had someone, I presume, that is better at one thing or another.
Well, presumably that's how the cultures worked, is you would have, you know, even biologically, we have something called a chronotype, whereby some people are AMers, some people are PMers, and typically humans tend to sleep biphasic. And I know there's a certain level of kind of myopathy in the fact that we go to tribal cultures to learn how tribal cultures work, and therefore presume that's how all humans are built to work. But in typical, you know, tribal cultures, you will have people who are the AMers who will get up, make the bread, go foraging, so on. Whilst the PMers are still sleeping, they'll then wake up towards the afternoon and they'll go for the hunt or for the run or to collect water, whilst the other ones catch up on their sleep. And then during the heat of the day, everyone has a siesta. And there's this, what would the word be, synergistic relationship between how humans interact, as some are have strengths in some things, some have strength in others. And that makes sense in a typical town whereby you'd have the baker, the butcher. But nowadays, we're losing the baker, the butcher, the candlestick maker, because everything's in a store. And those specialist skills are, you know, often abroad or being imported, or they're somewhere else. What are your feelings about the kind of globalization of the food chain, the lack of centralization or community in that chain? Do you feel that's a positive or is it a negative?
Well, I'm not sure it's an either and or, because once again, it's too difficult, and I'm too, you know, it's very typical for people who are educated to really jump on one or the other in a sense.
Absolutely.
Now the trouble is, you know, I've had all this great education and I'm reasonably well read, and I think I understand how the world works. And so then with that kind of foundation, you think, okay, I've now got these pillars of my identity and how I think the world works. But I know enough to know that that's fundamentally flawed. So I'm neither a fan but then I don't want to be a hedge sitter either, Charlie. Right? If I have to go on one camp or the other, I'm anti-globalization. But then I'm also a massive fan of it because of Zoom meetings with a guy on the other side of the world, or an iPhone, or you know, running shoes that are made by someone I will never meet, with all these wonderful products that are a product of industrialization. So I'm very careful with slamming one because of how conflated and what's the word I'm looking for? Where you're one thing and you say you're one thing and you're not.
Oh, contradictory.
Contradictory. There it is, mate. End of the day here. Yeah, and the PhD does that to you as well. Yes. You become very skeptical of everything and everyone, including yourself. And so I don't want to. It's quite a slippery slope.
Well, it's a very Socratic view to have. I can tell you definitely enjoy your philosophy for the fact that your principal answer was, "I know, therefore I know nothing."
Yeah, that's right. And the more you know, the less you know. And once again, you don't want to be too sort of postmodern on that. You have to have an opinion, I think, to a degree, and otherwise your life kind of becomes this sort of floundering mess. And so I definitely do. And but then telling you, which is a larger audience than telling my wife or my best friend, is quite a different opinion as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a trust of who you tell what your really core values are, because sometimes you get into trouble for that.
So how is it that you find you organize your value system or your thought system? You know, do you have kind of a nihilistic approach to there is no meaning to how we do things, whether it's globalized, whether it's local, we fundamentally create our own meaning? Or do you have more of a view of there is an inherent underlying tone and we're just still trying to work it out? You know, what would be your view on that?
Well, I've just finished the first manuscript of my book,
yeah,
and it's built largely on the last sort of 5 or 8 years worth of goings on for me, for adult Beau, in a sense. Now, as I'm sitting here in front of you today as a 40-year-old, and I've unpacked myself for the last 18 months from the age of 20 through to 40. I didn't really dig up much of my sort of pre-adulthood because in many respects it was sort of, you know, it happened so quickly, and it was just really about building the identity to start your adulthood in many respects. And it's very Freudian to dip back into there, and my memory's not very good of it anyway. But I do believe in social construction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I think, you know, people who drink wine and coffee often are the biggest wankers I know, because they're drinking something that to an infant or to a young child or to someone who doesn't drink coffee or wine is horrible. Yeah. It's bloody horrible. Yeah. And yet it becomes this religion to people of how a coffee should be and how a wine should be. Yeah. Now that's beyond the fact that a lot of wine tasters, when you do a blind tasting, they're full of shit anyway. They don't know the difference between $100 bottle of wine and a £3 one, you know? So, that speaks volumes. So they're talking to the label and how much someone paid to it rather than what their taste buds are telling them. Yeah. So I'm very much enamored and believe in social construction and how powerful that is. Yeah. And so that's a roundabout way of answering your question, Charlie, that I believe that we're kind of in search for things and we do it via mob mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of that modern mentality, it's bringing it back to the DIY side. You said something, and I believe it was a mile an hour because I jotted it down because I loved it, which is what started this page, which was the human body is remarkable. Maybe using tools and dexterity in other parts of your brain, don't know, keeps the legs going, which I really liked in the concept of using different areas of your brain in a way it hasn't been used before, or testing your views in a way they haven't been used, can therefore keep your body going and keep the human unit as a whole moving forwards. So I was curious, because obviously you're a great runner. You've got a history of running. How do you believe that your standpoint in terms of your philosophical views, your changing viewpoints in society, and then the ability to use a hammer and your ability to sew together a pair of trousers and impact on, say, your physical side, and, as I said, the human unit and the ability to sustain over long distances? Do you see that there's a certain convergence between all to form one greater sum?
Yeah, there's a lot of complication in that. And I wouldn't be quite sure where to start with your question in some respects, but look, I suppose in a simplistic, objective way, there are physiological answers to how and why a marathon is much easier over 24 hours done in chunks than it is done in one hit. Yeah. So regardless of what I was doing in the 50 minutes when I wasn't running every hour for that full day, it was probably rejuvenating. Yes. I suppose though, you know, when I was a kid and you'd fall or you'd have a cut finger or something, I know my dad, he would often come along and squeeze an opposite part of my body so that I wasn't thinking about the thing that was hurt. Yeah. And so I suppose that doing something like knitting or sewing or fixing in between running, in many respects, just makes us forget that maybe your legs are a little sore or you've got chafe or you've got a blister, you know. So we just tend to forget our physiological demise. I don't know. But whereas all you can think about during a marathon is bloody hell, you know, second to second, in many respects, you are just thinking about your body. Yeah. You know, the sort of link between your hands and your legs and this sort of cognitive state and your physical body, by golly, I mean, and that's where religion comes in. And I'm not very religious, but I imagine that it's so powerful, right? You can just, you think it, you can do it, or you don't think it, and it happens. And, you know, it's sort of amazing.
See, I went to a Catholic school growing up. Grandfather is a priest, so raised in a very religious environment, although I certainly can't say that I am now. But what I find so interesting is when you think of, say, prayer, which is, you know, the repetition of a certain objective, and the faith and belief in that it will be achieved by something greater than yourself. That's not necessarily any different to say you read a self-help book such as The Secret and you talk about the law of attraction. You talk about Bruce Lee's laws of self-actualization, or Conor McGregor said the same thing, and I will be a champion. I'm currently listening to Mike Tyson and he says the same thing. And you see this in athletes, and I'm like, well, that's the same thing religion says. There's a universal principle in the belief in one's ability to do something. And I mentioned Emerson, you know, self-reliance, being that state of you can always rely on yourself in order to finish something, which is why I find so interesting your handiwork. When you watch you, say, carve a paddle, which I know you maybe want to do, is carving a paddle. The eye to detail that you have when you're looking at it is far beyond anything that I've got. I can bodge together a bench and hope that there's no nail sticking out that would fail a health and safety test. That's the most in detail I can go. So in terms of my running, what's always held me back was actually my attention span. And I cannot get my brain to be able to run for more than, say, 12 miles. And it's boredom. I just can't get over the mundane boredom. And I've found personally that housework, sitting on a bike for an hour, is very useful to that. So is there a way of, say, using that skill set from mundane tasks and finding a benefit in the running? Would you say that applies?
Well, yeah, running by nature is very mundane at a very core level, I suppose. But running is so popular around the world, I suppose more than any other kind of human movement beyond walking, simply because that the simplicity of the repetition obviously gives humans something.
Yeah,
I tend to, I've never been bored, and I think that was because probably dad more than mum, but then both of them were kind of manic, always doing something. Mum relaxes. Oh, they both relax really well, but they relaxed when they were tired, based on physicality. You know, mum being a nurse or dad being out in the farm. So I suppose to your question about the mundane and why you've got a cap at 12 miles, or you build a bench with skewed nails, or a perfectly fine bench that doesn't have that level of lushness, I don't know. That will come. You're a young bloke. You got plenty of time left yet to develop that finer detail. And so, you know, I would never have thought as a 20-year-old that I would love Scrabble ever.
Right.
You know, and now I love playing Scrabble. It's a slower form of game, and it's, you know, I might take 20 minutes to have a go sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's bonkers to my 20-year-old self.
Yeah. So how did you find age progressed that?
Yeah, totally, mate. You know, and I never wanted to have kids at 20 or 25 or get married at 30. It just things just evolved. In saying that, I always did like making something pretty when I was 20 as well, and I was a sort of a perfectionist then. And yet, none of my stuff is really perfect, but it's very practical, and I really like lastability. I think that's a wonderful aspect of DIY. And I've just made a cabin on the hill. I was sort of half up there then, or on the way to it, thinking, oh no, I've got to go talk to Charlie at 4:30. And I did this during COVID without my wife knowing. It cost $60, and I've made this cabin, which is an office that'll be a film in a couple of months, and it's beautiful. It's this lovely bespoke junk cabin made on the top of the paddock. And I've been really fussy about it because I could, you know, if it was work, then maybe it was a little bit different, where you'd get it done and it wouldn't be quite so bespoke and quite so pretty. But it'll come, Charlie. You'll smash through that 12-mile barrier. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah, because I loved in was it Drunk Paddle, where you went through and from your commute from the train station to the university, you just picked up everything needed to be able to build a paddle. You know, what would be your advice to, say, a young idiot who is trying to learn how to just get on with jobs, how to use junk materials? What would be your kind of go-to startup advice for saying how to, for necessarily for people who haven't seen the film, how to get started with building a junk cabin?
Well, the thing is, with something like a box, like a cabin, you know, because they really are a box, and depending on what kind of roof you want to put on, or what kind of doors, or if you're insulating, things can get complicated, or more layers like an onion. But in many respects, it's very simple. You know, a 10-year-old boy or girl who has building blocks that they played with as a kid understand what is required of that box.
Yeah.
And if they think they don't, they're wrong. They could go down and you can see very transparently most of my building knowledge, whilst I was taught by a really good guy, some fundamentals of the actual art form and the practice of it, which is mostly, by the way, how to use tools. Yeah. I think I'm a good builder now because I know how to quickly use tools or transfer what I'm seeing into an entity via wood and tool use. But fundamentally, I've learned most of my building by walking through building sites. Yeah. To a house frame that sticks, you know, so it's in skeletal form, and I see it, and then I can just make it. I can just, that's how you do a valley of a roof, and that's where the bearers go to the joists, and they go to the flooring, and then plates, and then studs, and then another plate, and then ceiling joists, and then away you can go up to a second floor, and so be it. And it's just layers, and it's very basic. And the best builders know 20 layers ahead, or 50 or 100 layers ahead, and they're always able to go, okay, that's the next bit. But I think anyone can. I've got two 10-year-old, they're 13 now, two 13-year-old nephews. Yeah. Their brains are smart and sharp. They would be able to build everything I've built just by going and observing it at a job site.
Do you ever get social anxiety or kind of concerns about picking up junk wood and scraps from the side of the road? And do you ever get any concerns?
I totally own it these days, mate. Yeah. And oddly enough, too, when you own it, you don't see it. You don't see other people looking at you funny because you're in your own world, you're in your own bubble. Yeah. Confidence, self-actualize, whatever you want to call it. You know, you just think, stuff this, I'm just taking it. And I know that it would rot or someone else would take it, so I'm just going to do it. And it doesn't bother me anymore. And I think it may have one stage in my life, and that's why I've made it so that it doesn't.
Yeah. Do you have any views on the sustainability of how we're using furniture nowadays? For instance, I'm trying my best not to go to a certain big brand furniture flat pack store. And I'm trying to make a very concise effort to buy secondhand, to buy everything as you. We've got bin day today, and I've just nicked up some rusted garden chairs, one of them with a hole in it that someone was throwing out. And I went, I could paint them, or I could throw some. You know, what is your view on the sustainability of how things work? Do you see it changing in the future, how we use furniture?
I think it's got to be. You know, there's some great books out there called Made to Break, and the disposable culture and whatnot. And look, our big brands, they're kind of, when things have got less and less of a use by date now, it's sad to see. There's a great series in the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, called War on Waste, by this guy Craig Rucastle and his mates. Yeah. And he does a whole episode on furniture, just like you said, from those big brands that we all know of now. This commodified, gentrified world all looks the same furniture around the world, made of chipboard. Yeah. And when a screw goes awry and that chipboard comes loose, it's bloody hard to fix. Yeah. You know, real wood is easy to fix because it's got constitution. It's really hard to fix chipboard unless you pull in a whole bunch of chemicals and glues and a whole bunch of crap, you know. So good on you, man. I love it. You know, I'm the same with my properties. I'll probably never build a new house ever, and if I do, it will be out of secondhand materials. It won't be out of new lumber.
Yeah. Are you familiar? Have you ever watched Parks and Recreation?
Not much, but enough to know of what it's like. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Ron Swanson?
Yes.
Mustachio. Nick Offerman, the man who plays him, is a fantastic woodworker, and that was how that's how he made all of his money, was building sets, despite being an actor. And he's actually got a book, Good Clean Fun, which is about how to build a canoe. And
Oh, really?
he's got the Offerman wood shop in California, which he was running before he hit big as an actor. And he has a very basic stance of learn how to build a box, because learning how to build a box, you can basically learn how to use every relevant skill there is to woodworking. Once you can do that, you can build a chair. And he has this brilliant viewpoint of, even if the chair you build is rubbish, even if the project you've built is absolute crap, at least you can pass it down to your grandkids and it'll still be there. And your grandkids can go, oh, that's that awful table that my granddad left to me. I hate seeing it, but he built it. And it stays in the family. What I liked was when you did Junk Office, you called it sausage wood. It's all the scraps and sawdust of what's left over and doesn't want to be used. That's just compressed into this, cheap chipboard. What do you see about the, in relevance to Offerman's point about building your own furniture and what that can bring into the home? Do you share that there's a certain family camaraderie around having a load of junk? Do you think that's something that could be important? Or
yeah, you have to keep a lid on it in terms of, I've been to plenty of places that are lived in by bowerbirds and they collect more than they make or reuse. And that's okay. It gives us people that don't collect as much as them someone to go and get stuff from.
Yeah.
But you're talking to me today this is a little extension I put onto the back of the house, which is all made out of mostly junk wood, on a table that's an old bench top of well over 100 years old that I'll oil up, and it's got lovely, great satisfaction, like you were saying with your grandfather analogy. I suppose the thing with the sausage wood, my so-called sausage wood line, is that once again, you've got to be careful with that too, because in many respects, sausages, and I'm not a big meat eater, but sausages are a great use of an animal because it uses all the bits and pieces. Yeah. And it's less waste. And an animal, damn it, should not be wasted. It's an amazing resource, and respect the life that it was and whatnot. And in some ways, chipboard is an incredible revolution of wood as well, because mills for a long time, they had beautiful timber and the rest went to firewood, Yeah. And so I think it's a good revolution of our milling system now to do it. The trick is it should only be the scraps. It should be the crap. And I know a lot of good saw logs in the world now go straight to the common denominator of wood chips. And that is tragic. Yeah. Because it just won't last as long as chipboard as it will as lumber. And so that's I suppose the sticking point.
What feelings do you get sat in an extension that you built versus, say, an extension you bought flat packed that was delivered to your door and you just assembled in an afternoon?
Well, I've never really done that, so it's a hypothetical I don't have an insight from. I have bought crap before when I was at work, or whether it was for not necessarily for me. I did in my first house buy chipboard bookshelves because I was out of time and I just wanted to put them up, and I don't know, it was a crap excuse. And I remember thinking when I moved them to the next house and one of them chipped and I had to rescrew them, they were, I thought I'll never do that again. So whilst I could say that, yes, this feels really good to be in this thing I built, I don't really think of it that way because my whole life is like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the current, so we're obviously still in the COVID crisis, the pandemic, and at least in the UK, our hardware shops have been booked out. I tried to put an order in and it was like a 2-month waiting list for home delivery. So we know that recently there's been a massive boom in DIYers. Do you think that's going to have an overall positive effect, having so many people wanting to build stuff, or is it going to have a negative effect in the fact they don't really know what they're doing and they're just going to start damaging things?
Well, not to be offensive for you, I would say that it's a blip in the radar of humanity. Yeah. I don't think it will touch. I think the greater consumerist drive of people, and in fact, I saw it with the toilet paper thing in the multiple rounds of COVID flare-ups we've had here in Australia. And Australia's been very good. In saying that, when you see supermarkets emptied, it's this sort of hoarding tragedy of the commons mentality, which I think is bonkers. I'm not sure people are upskilling because of COVID.
Right.
There is a touch of it. I know seeds are now hard to come by and all this sort of stuff. And I hope it instigates goodness. But
Yeah.
if everything was to go back to what it was like in February tomorrow, I think the greater majority of the world would ditch all of these new pseudo habits they've got and go straight back to what they were. And that's being a bit of a negative Nelly, but you know, I think it'll take more than this for people to really shift. And I hope I'm wrong.
How did it feel to have your own veg garden in February?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, our summer, and I'm a bit of a lazy gardener in some respects too, because I generally only do 6 months a year. So we do spring and summer rather than the rest of the year when you should be really fallowing and preparing your soils and putting in your root veggies and stuff. And we haven't. But then I've got the crap excuse of having a 9-month-old child at my feet. So that's one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So projects you've got ongoing at the moment, you've got the Commute coming up.
Yeah, the Commute will be out by the end of the year, 2 episodes of that.
What's the narrative to the Commute?
Well, in many respects, it's suited a day job. So I'm no longer at the university. I'm now full-time filmmaking and writing. They've shut down the outdoor education course and me with it. So I said, righto, I don't particularly want to teach other things. And there was potential to stay, but I thought, no, I'm going to go and do something else and use this as an opportunity. And so, but then 10 years at the university was very much, you get your 20 days off a year and the rest of the time you're a university guinea pig. So in between that time, I wanted to do things that sort of still tickled my adventurous sort of feathers. So I thought of these short range things that were intense and quite challenging and different. And in some respects mundane, like you were saying before, and they were excellent. And so one of them was a walk to work and one of them was a paddle to work. And I was going to do a bunch more, and I probably will. I'll probably still just turn up to an office I no longer inhabit. They were excellent, Charlie. They were game changers.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to that coming out. You've also got the book. Do you have any kind of release dates or?
Yeah, it comes out. Well, it's global. It goes everywhere March 1st. But anyone can purchase it now and just have to pay the extra postage from Australia.
Fantastic. I've already got my pre-order in place, which I'm very excited for.
Oh, good on you, mate. That's really good support, because I know you probably paid almost as much in postage, didn't you, in the UK?
Yeah, I think it was more than the pre-order. But like you said,
it's a real bummer, but it'll have a nice note from me in the front. I really like it when people have done this, but it'll probably have some overseas publishers with it. Comes out March 1st, called The Backyard Adventurer, and I think it's a cracking read. There's some real insight in there, and it's been a real grind. And I'm as fussy with words as I am a canoe paddle.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to include some links. So even if the European distributor isn't available yet, I'll make sure to put a link to somewhere. But thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, Charlie. You're onto a good thing here, mate. And I wish you well, and go well in COVID, brother.
Oh, thank you very much.